So the next thing we're going to talk about is an opening called the King's Indian. And like we have done all along, we'll start with an introduction this time again. And the intro that we want to bring up to the kids this time is, we want to make sure the kids know there are three portions in a game. There are three segments to a game: the opening, the middle game, and the end game. And by now everybody should know that the first 12 moves or so is the opening, right? Because in the 3 rules of chess, where you control the center squares, develop your pieces, protect your king, we're talking about the opening there. We want to make sure that we have a good opening. And we talk about how you do a running race. When you're in a race, the first thing you do before the race starts is you tie your laces. You want to tie your shoelace before the race starts, not after everybody has started to run. Everybody is now running in the race and you look down and the shoelaces are untied. What do? You desperately hope you don't trip and fall, right? But there's a time for doing that, and that is before the game. So everything has its time, and that's what we're doing here. In an opening, we want to make sure that we have the most effective opening at all times, right? Now, the most common opening we see is the king pawn 2 spaces. The most common opening that we want everybody to do is the king pawn 2 spaces. Now, by the way, in the intro for the King's Indian, we also want to talk about this word called fianchetto. In the King's Indian, the opening is, the key word we are going to talk about is fianchetto. F-I-A-N, fianchetto, C-H-E-T-T-O. And let's have it repeated 2 times. Fianchetto.
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 Okay, so let's talk about the diagonal. Well, from that pawn, from that square to that square, that is a diagonal. How many squares do we have in the diagonal? 1, 2, 3. Let's go over 1 from the E. 1, 2, 3, 4. What is your longest diagonal? The one from A8 to H1. But how many squares does it have? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the longest diagonal in chess has 8 squares. And there are 2 such diagonals. From A8 to H1 and from H8 to A1. Now let us say that I move this pawn up 1 space and I get my bishop there. Now this bishop is perhaps the most effective bishop ever, because it's now attacking along the longest diagonal. Fianchettoing the bishop means that you're taking your bishop and having it attack along the longest diagonal. Bishop attacking along the longest diagonal is called fianchetto. Bishop attacking along the longest diagonal is called fianchetto. Now let's talk about the King's Indian defense. King's Indian could be an offense or a defense. If the whites does it, it's an offense. If the blacks do it, it's a defense. It's the exact same set of moves. What we do is we move. It's the whites' turn to play. The whites move it 2 spaces. Fine. The whites could. So in this case, because we're talking of the defense, we don't care what the whites does. They could do a Roy Lopez opening. They could do. You need to know some openings by heart. I know my Roy Lopez. I know my King's Indian. That's what I know for now. Right? But let's make sure we know some openings. But the whites could do any opening they want. But the blacks would go. They would start off with their knight. In King's Indian, it's a knight opening attack. In King's Indian, you open up with your knight. Well, usually when there is no attack, when they have a chance to move the queen pawn 2 spaces as well, they usually take it. It's good to have both the pawns in the center squares. But fine, what will we do? We move this pawn up 1 step. And then they move something else. And what do? We go there. See these in a row like that? This diagonal is what you want to see. This diagonal here is what the King's Indian, this is the standard symbol for the King's Indian. Rook, bishop and a knight in that order. And then let's say he wants to do something else. And in the fourth move, when you can do it right away, you castle. And now you're fianchettoing the bishop, because the bishop is attacking along the longest diagonal. Your king is secure very early into the game, and now you have all of these pieces that you can now develop with the sole purpose of attack. Because usually you start your attack and then you defend yourself from the other attacks while attacking the others. You do both at the same time. Here you're taking care of your king first. The first 4 moves, while developing your pieces, you're taking care of your king first. And after you do that, you develop the other pieces. So very simply, this King's Indian begins with a knight opening. It's not a king pawn 2 spaces, it's a knight opening game. Right? You open with your knight, and then you push this pawn 1 step forward, and then you get into this classic picture of the 3 pieces in a diagonal. They're usually in a row, now they're in a diagonal. And then in the 4th move, you castle. King's Indian offers one of the fastest castlings in the games ever. There is no other game where you can castle faster than this than in a King's Indian. You're not wasting any time. You're doing the fastest castle ever in 4 moves, and then you start your attack. Let's see what the King's Indian, that was the King's Indian defense. Let's see what a King's Indian offense would look like. It's pretty much the same, but the offense happens with the white side, right? So again, the whites begin with a knight. King's Indian always begins with a knight. So the king's knight, that is the queen side knight. So if you take the entire chessboard, and this is what I did, I take the sticker and I say, this is the half of the chessboard. The right half, that half where the kings are, that is the king side half. This side where the queens are all here, this is the queen half. Because there are 2 people in the royal family, the king and the queen. That is the king side of the kingdom, this is the queen side of the battlefield at least, right? So the King's Indian always begins with your king's knight moving there. Again, so far we have not violated those 3 rules of control the center squares, develop the pieces, protect your king. You're still controlling the center squares, you're still developing your pieces. And while developing your pieces for the bishop, you have to open a doggy door. And we say you open that doggy door usually to let this guy out, but we're now letting him out through this doggy door. Right? And in the next move, you go there, so it's free to castle. And in the 4th move, you have castled. Now what would that guy do in the meantime? He could employ any of his defenses he wants. He could start off with a queen pawn defense. Right? Or he could go with a Danish gambit. We teach about the Danish gambit. We teach all these new names too. We're trying to limit ourselves to just 1 or 2 openings in the entire session, so you don't have to struggle much with them. Because once you teach this, you're done with this class. The kids, it's on the kids to now remember and play and practice for the rest of their lives. But you're done. Right? So we want to stick to like 1 or 2 of these in the entire 8-week session. I think just 1 for now. Right? And then he could have done that first. He could have got his bishop out. He could have got the other guy out to fianchetto from that. He could have done whatever he wants, but we don't bother with what he's doing because we are staying local to just that little area. He could bring every piece of his outside and be very aggressive with his, but we don't care about that because we're only focused on this little side. Once we are settled with that, we're going to go launch a full-out attack on the other side. Like for example, if you don't like these both here, and so I would probably do this. I would go there, or I'd go there somewhere, and then I would move this 2 spaces. If he's going to get me, I'm going to get him there. And now I have this guy for free. Because he's trapped. And if he's going to escape by going somewhere else, fine, I'll settle for this time. Right? But I could do all those cool things because now I'm not focused on the king. My only sole goal now is to get his king. Because my king is well protected in this corner there. And for the most part, when I have it like this, for the most part when I have castle, in a King's Indian, it is not usually common to move those pieces.
I was going to ask.
You'd want to keep this fortress intact because you have the other ones to develop. Right? So some people say that the disadvantage with the King's Indian is you're focusing entirely there. But that's a good focus because now once the king is safe, and these guys have already developed, because fianchettoing is very strong for the bishop because you're giving him so much room to fight. Because usually bishops don't get to control both the center squares, but now you do. Because when you go from, say, when you go this way, you only control one or the other, not both at a time. Fianchettoing lets you control both the squares with one bishop. And that's a very strong advantage for the King's Indian. And then we have a practice where you start talking to the kids and say, what is the first move in a King's Indian defense? And they make a move. And then they'll probably make a mistake and you correct their mistake. And everybody in the class gets to pick one move, the next immediate move. Right? So, and again, King's Indian is a short game, 4 to 5 moves tops, right? And then the game is over. And your turn is over, that discussion is over, you restart again, and you restart again. When they do their gameplay, you want to make sure that they're practicing King's Indian. The whites would do the King's Indian offense, the blacks would do the King's Indian defense, but they are practicing King's Indian that whole day. No other openings allowed. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure they know their King's Indian.
Okay.
And that's all we have for King's Indian.